Hello, and welcome to today's Advisicon Academy webinar. My name is David Bentz, and I'm the director of Advisicon's project management office. I love technology, and I always get excited when a new tool comes along that can help people do their work faster, more efficiently, and with greater accountability. In this presentation, we'll be looking at Microsoft's Power Automate tool to give you a brief overview of what it is and how you might use it to monitor and manage your projects and teams. Let's get started. Today's webinar is Automate Projects with Power Automate. We're going to be covering what Power Automate is, an application for Microsoft Office 365 that was formerly known as Flow. We'll talk a little bit about how we get access to Power Automate and what licenses are required in order to be able to make and use flows. And finally, what is a flow and how can I use it? Power Automate is Microsoft's modern workflow automation tool. It allows for automation of repetitive tasks and notifications of activities and reminders for unfinished work and many other things. Basically, any kind of trigger activity that you can pull together that is in one of the supported connector applications can then be used to access or activate some other form of activity. A flow consists of essentially a trigger event and one or more action steps. So when something happens, do this. And then that's basically, you can make them as simple or as complex as you want. To get Power Automate, you have to be an Office 365 user. If you are an Office 365 user, you can use a flow with a standard connector for no additional cost. There are some premium connections and some additional functions and features that are allowed within Power Automate that do require a per user or per flow plan, which various organizations might find that they need if they are using some of these more premium connectors. If you're not an Office 365 user or you don't have access to Flow, Microsoft also offers an opportunity for you to be able to do personal development using Power Apps, and the URL is listed below here. Basically, this grid here for folks that are really interested in finding out what you can and can't do with the Power Automate, the area that's circled in the green box shows you the kinds of things that we can do with Power Automate in the included use of Office 365. We can do standard cloud flows using standard connectors and are able to look at some of the Dataverse for Teams functionality, as well as using some of the attended desktop flows as long as you are a Windows 10 user. How do I use Flow or Power Automate? There are 5 basic types of flows within Power Automate. First off, we have an automated cloud flow, which is a flow that is triggered automatically by some kind of event happening. Then we have the instant cloud flows, which are on-demand flows that can be triggered by a button or another flow, and typically would be something that would be embedded on a form page or maybe a mobile application. Third, we have a scheduled cloud flow that's going to run regularly on a schedule. So, for example, if on a weekly basis I want to get a summary digest email of activities that have happened on a project, if I want to routinely perform some form of maintenance activity or something else like that, we would use a scheduled flow. Desktop flows are a relatively new function within Power Automate, and these are really cool because it allows you to install an application on your computer that basically lets you record tasks in a desktop application that maybe doesn't have an API or some kind of automated connection, and then you can have that task repeated. Basically, it's kind of like a macro in the old Word and Excel applications. You can automate functions that you're doing over and over again. We won't cover business process flows today because that's a premium feature, but business process flows are a function that's pretty commonly used in, say, CRM or ERP systems to where you're going to walk a user through a lifecycle process that then has multiple steps and different features at different parts of the process. What are some of the things that we can use Power Automate for? Typically, might want to use it for approvals. If we have an intake request form, or if we have a document approval process for when someone has added a document to a library or maybe wants to publish a version of it. We can also automate approvals for work requests or provide notifications when tasks are added to a project or when something is completed or when something is late. And when something happens in Teams, we can create notifications or we can create Teams notifications. We can automate work process for desktop applications. We can automatically copy files to OneDrive or a SharePoint library and many, many more things. So with that, let's jump right into the tool. To access Power Automate, we first need to log into Office 365. I'm here at the office.com website, which gets me the Office 365 app page, and I've gone down to the bottom left corner and hit the All Apps expansion to show this list here. You might already have Power Automate showing up in your list of applications on the left navigation, but if not, you can find it here in this section or by clicking on the waffle icon in the upper left corner of your screen, and you'll see it showing up in this list of applications. Here we have the Power Automate homepage, where we can see a kind of an overview of all of the different things that we can do within Power Automate. A couple of key things to note here is the navigation on the left side of the screen that takes you to show either the action items for any approvals that you might have received for flows that are running, a list of your own flows that you've either created or have been added to as an owner, ability to create new flows, which kind of we'll walk through in just a second, and also a list of the available templates and connectors. The rest of this information down here is more related to kind of the back end side of things for the rest of the Power Platform, especially connected to Power Apps. So we won't be going over that in too much detail today. But the other key thing to note is up here in the upper right corner of the screen, over next to your name icon, you'll see this environments list. And this is important because this is actually kind of the essentially the container that has all of the different Power Apps and flows for a particular grouping. This is particularly important if your environment is using CRM. Dynamics 365 will typically have its own. You can see here I have my own CRM environment. We have some different development environments and then kind of our default environment. Typically, the first time you come to Power Automate, you'll probably be in this default environment, but this kind of will come into play as we look at some of the other flows, particularly if they have any kind of approval piece next to them. So we're going to start with looking at templates here. So if we look at the templates page, we can see that there are a whole bunch of different already pre-made flows that have a lot of different things here. And so we can see there's this grouping here. They're categorized by, featured, most popular, anything that's shared with us. And then some different options here. So a lot of times if you're looking for the ability to do something, you might find something that's here already, and that will really help you out in terms of automating your process. The connectors list is a good place to go to look to see, do I have the ability to connect to a particular application using Power Automate? So we can see this list here. Here's kind of the popular ones, obviously, within the Microsoft space or within Twitter or connecting to an RSS feed. And we can see here the example of some of these other applications where they say premium connector. If you see premium connector listed underneath any of these, any flow that has one of these connectors in use will require the use of that advanced license that you have to pay extra for. So just be aware of that as you're kind of looking at some of your flows and anything that you're building, is that if you do connect to something that requires a premium connection, that could require some additional costs. But there's a whole host of things in here that are available in the standard connection capability. The create page gives us the opportunity to see the different types of flows as we noticed. So we have the automated cloud flows, the instant cloud flows, scheduled flows, or desktop flows. We don't see the business process flows here because business process flows are typically a collection of flows and other processes. And so we can either start from a template here, which just gives us another shortcut access to the templates feature, or we can build something from scratch. Before we dive into that, I'm going to demonstrate a couple of the flows that I've previously built. As we look in the My Flows section here, we'll notice that this first tab for Cloud Flows will show the flows that I have built and are only owned by me. Desktop Flows would show any of the flows that are built using the Desktop Flow Builder, which I haven't done anything yet with that. And then the Shared with Me would show any flow that I have been added to as an owner that's also owned by someone else in the organization. So that's where if you're collaborating on a flow or you have a flow that multiple people have access to manage, that's where they'll show up. And just a note is that if you do share a flow with someone else, it will move from Cloud Flows into the Shared with Me section, even though you're the one who created it. So as we can look here, this first one is an example of an automated flow that will work when an email arrives. So this is a cool one because it's looking at when a new email arrives in my inbox that I'm at mentioned in, it will add a to-do to my Microsoft To-Do application. So if we click into the edit button up in here, we can actually see the flow itself. And now this is a very simple flow. It's just simply two steps. So when you're in the flow itself, if you click on any of the steps, it will expand it to show the information here. So when we first looked at this, obviously it's looking at my inbox. So it's going to be monitoring emails that come in. And this step in particular, this trigger action, is when a new email arrives mentioning, and then I can specify the list within my to-do application, give that task a title. I'm using the subject line of the email, and then I can set up a due date. I'm just basically adding another day to the due date, and then I will flag the importance of this task based on the Outlook email importance, and then copy in the body of the email. So we can demonstrate how this works really quickly here. If I create a new email, I'm just going to send an email to myself. We're going to call this a subject line Power Automate demo. Now the key part of this is some text, and using Outlook's app mention function, this is going to be the key trigger. So what's cool about this flow is that this will only create follow-on tasks for any email that comes in where I'm app mentioned. So as we now send that task over here, I'm going to go ahead and click back out of this. We can see on the home page of this particular flow that there's a run history down here at the bottom that can show all of the different pieces and different times that this flow is run. So we can notice that the most recent one here says it's succeeded, so it's been completed. Here is that email that I sent. And now if I bring up my to-do application, we'll notice that in this list that I've called flow tasks, we can see a task that was created for a due date of tomorrow, Power Automate demo follow-up. And we can put in, we'll see that the blurb summary that's there, as well as the entire content of the email. So that's a really handy way to be able to put some follow-up pieces on there, and we can do additional automation in that as well. But that was just a simple template that was available and was able to then create tasks based on emails arriving. Something a little bit more complex than that, which is an example of a scheduled flow, is this one right here of creating a daily summary of planner tasks by bucket. So say, for example, you're managing a planner board or you have a bunch of planner boards and you want to just receive some daily digest emails that kind of give you some information around the tasks that are happening in the planner. Now, this is one that's really nice that it's a template because there's quite a bit going on in it. As we can open this up, we'll notice that we've got all these variables, we've got to pull in data and information, we're going to loop through and we're going to create a table, and then we're going to send an email. So what's really nice is that all of this was pre-built. I didn't have to do any of this. All I had to do when I pulled this in was just to make sure that we specified when this thing was going to run, and then I had to tell it which planner board it's going to pull from. And then in the email section, I had to specify who we're emailing, and then all the rest of it was taken care of. And what this does then is it creates an email that it'll then send on whatever interval you want. I'll zoom in here a little bit so we can actually see this. And we can notice here that it's got this nicely formatted table that gives information around the task cards and all this other information on here. Now, if you wanted to drill in and specify, maybe you wanted to add the column for who it was assigned to, you could also include that information. But here's just a great example of maybe a scheduled just summary digest that you could have sent to someone maybe not even on the planner board, because we could email this list to anybody. Let's talk about creating a flow. So we're going to go ahead and create one from scratch just to kind of give you a quick overview of what are some of the things that we can do. And we're going to do an automated cloud flow as our example here. Now, when you get to the automated flow, we can either have a name or the system will generate one, but maybe we want to look at, we can see some of these default triggers that are listed here. We can do a search for something else, or if we choose to skip this, we'll just get brought into the main page to create. Now, what we notice here in the form that displays the connectors, let's try something like SharePoint, for example. So when we've selected the SharePoint connector, we can see here's the list of all the triggers that are available for the SharePoint connection. And then here's a list of all the actions that you can do with a SharePoint item. So since this is the very first step of our flow, we have to have a trigger item. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put a trigger for when an item is created or modified. And now It signed me in. And so we're going to pick a SharePoint site. So I'm going to pick a particular SharePoint site, and then we can look at a list. So this is a list when an item is created or modified on a list. So we're going to pick those two lists. And so now what this is going to say is that anytime an item is added or modified on this work progress tracker, that's what's going to trigger this flow to run. And so then maybe what I want to do is maybe I want to do a notification. So I can look at, some standard things. So maybe I want to send a Teams notification. And maybe I want to post a message. So I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, whenever something's added to this list, we're going to post a message to Teams. The very first time you make a connection, it'll add that. So we're going to add the team ID. So this will show all the teams that we're a part of here. And so you pick the team, we can pick the channel, and then we have a message. So here's where the dynamic content allows us to add items that were an output of the previous step. So when this item was created or modified, the result that's going to kick back from SharePoint is going to include all of these values. And so we can see all of the various pieces that are a part of this. And this is pulling from the fields list and the columns that are in this existing list. There's not much in this particular group, but what we're going to go ahead and do is we will say, we're going to put some text in here. We'll say a new item was added to the work to the list. And then we'll give it some information. We'll say, here's what the title was. And then we'll go ahead and click on this particular data field, and that's going to add that in here, put a couple of returns in there. So we're basically just formatting the email output that would come from here. And then maybe we'll go ahead and put the assigned to display name. All right. And then we'll go ahead and hit save. Now we'll notice it says your flow is ready to go. We recommend you test it. And so what we can do to test this, if we hit the test button, modify a list item in the SharePoint folder you selected to trigger it. There aren't any recently used flows, so we would have to do this manually. So we're going to select manually. We'll save and test. This flow is now activated, and it's going to wait for us to modify a list item in that SharePoint folder. This is that list that we're tracking on that flow. So if we create a new item in this list, test work item. And then the other item that we were tracking on that was the assigned to. So we're going to go ahead and assign it to myself. And now we're going to go ahead and save this. So this list now has an item that's been created in it. And if we refresh our flow, we should very soon see we will see that that flow succeeded. And now if we're back in Teams, bring up here, we'll notice that in my Teams, there was a post that just got made. And we can see all of that information. So it pulled in the title, pulled in the description, and it pulled in the assigned to. That's a really neat way that we can create automated notifications, particularly if there's a list that we're tracking. We can do the same thing with tasks that are being added into Project Online, as well as other parts of the system. Finally, we'll do a demo of an approval workflow, because I think this is one of the areas where Power Automate particularly shines. I'm going to go to an example here of a flow that was created that's going to add a planner task when there's approval of a form submission. So basically, the way this flow works is once there's a response submitted on a Microsoft form, we're going to start an approval request. And if the item's approved, we're going to create a task on a planner board. So let's just walk through and demo how this works. We specify which form we're looking at. We're going to pull in all of the information about that particular form response. And then we get to start an approval here. And so in this scenario, we've said, first to respond, and we're pre-assigning who the approver is. And then we look at the conditions of saying if it was approved, then we're going to create that task. We've specified which planner board that task is going to get created in, and then information about that task will be emailed to the person who submitted the request. Let's see what this looks like. We have a sample form here. Using Power Automate. And we can have all kinds of things in this form. That title is really the only piece that we're connected to right now. So we'll go ahead and submit this as a response. Now going back to this flow, we can see that we have a running task here. And so we can click into this task and we'll see now we're showing that this response was submitted and it pulled in the details there. And it's now started the approval process. And now it's going to sit here and wait in this state until I approve it. This is one of those areas where we'll now see if we go into our action items and we go under approvals, we'll notice that I have an approval request here that's saying approve the task for creation. This is also going to my email. I've now received an email from Power Automate asking me to approve or reject this item. And if I have the approvals app added to my Teams, I'll also see the pop-up notification in Teams. So this kind of goes in a lot of different areas. So we're going to go ahead and hit approve. If I wanted to put comments on here, can hit submit, which now puts this in. And if we go back to that flow, we'll see that it's now completed. It's now succeeded. And I've received an email that says this task was approved and created in Planner with the name of that task. And if we go to that Planner board, we'll see that here is that new task that we just created. And it put a start date and gave the task the name and assigned it to me. Thank you for watching this webinar. I hope that you found it helpful. For more information about Power Automate and other Microsoft tools, or for assistance with your existing processes, please contact our office. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, I wish you the best in your project automating adventures. Bye for now.